Three of the most trusted whiskey brands in America come out of the exact same factory. In Indiana. Not similar whiskey, the same tank. Different mountain on every label, different price tag, same liquid inside. One of those brands got sued for lying about it in court. I'm naming all 5 brands you need to skip, and 3 that actually tell you the truth. And I'm saving the worst one for last, because it's not some sketchy Instagram brand. It's a name you probably trust. So here's the story you've been sold. Small distillery. Family recipe. Some guy's grandfather in a barn with a copper still. That's the whole reason craft whiskey costs more than the stuff next to it. You're not paying for the liquid. You're paying for the story wrapped around it. Here's the part that made me sit up. There is no legal definition for handcrafted. None. There's no legal definition for small batch either. Go check. The only 2 things a whiskey label is legally required to get right are the alcohol percentage and what type of spirit is inside the bottle. Everything else, the mountain, the family, the Prohibition legend, a marketing team wrote that. Nobody had to prove any of it. 10 years ago, there were about 100 craft distilleries in this country. Today, over 1,400. That's not 100 new families discovering whiskey overnight. A lot of that growth is brands buying finished whiskey from somewhere else, slapping a story on it, and putting it on a shelf next to actual small distillers who've been grinding for a decade. And a huge chunk of that somewhere else has one address: Lawrenceburg, Indiana. A company called MGP Ingredients runs a facility out there so massive it's basically feeding half the craft whiskey aisle in your liquor store. Quietly, for years. This isn't a rumor. It's public. It's sitting right there in federal label filings. It's just never the thing printed on the front of the bottle in big letters. Here's the loophole that lets this happen. Labels used to have to say the actual state where the whiskey was distilled. No wiggle room. That rule still technically exists. Nobody's really enforcing it anymore. So a company can slap Colorado or Kentucky heritage across the front, and the whiskey inside never came near either state. Brand 1. Templeton Rye. The pitch: a secret Prohibition-era recipe from Templeton, Iowa. Al Capone's favorite drink, small batch, made in Iowa. Sounds incredible, right? Here's what's actually true. It was distilled in Indiana. By MGP, using a stock recipe the company had bought, not some family secret handed down since the 20s. A class action lawsuit got filed. Iowa's own attorney general signed off on it as legitimate. Templeton settled and had to change the label to say, distilled in Indiana. Had to drop the Prohibition story completely. I'm not saying that. A court is saying that. Brand 2. Widow Jane. If you've ever been in a nice Brooklyn bar, you've seen this bottle. The whole identity is built around water from the actual Widow Jane mine, this old limestone cave, dripping with history, distilled with real care. NBC News actually dug into this one. Turns out the flagship bourbon isn't distilled by Widow Jane at all. It's bought in bulk from a distillery in Kentucky. And that mine water on every single label? Sourced from near the mine, not from inside it. People who used to work there told NBC that directly. That one stopped me, because the mine wasn't a footnote. It was the entire brand. It was on the bottle. In every interview, the whole reason you'd pick this over the one next to it. And it wasn't quite true. I'll be honest, this is the one that changed how I shop. Not because the whiskey's bad. By most accounts, it's actually decent. But I kept thinking about the moment someone stands in a liquor store, picks this bottle up over a cheaper one, and pays the extra $10 or $15 specifically because of that mine story. That's not a small transaction. That's somebody trusting a company with their money, based on a detail that, according to the people who'd know best, isn't quite accurate. You want to know why brands do this? It's not complicated once you see the money. Sourced whiskey from somewhere like MGP costs a fraction of what it takes to build a real distillery, buy stills, hire a distiller, and sit on barrels for years waiting for them to age. But a bottle with a mountain, a mine, a dead grandfather, that sells for 2, sometimes 3 times what the same unbranded whiskey goes for down the street. The story isn't decoration. The story is the entire profit margin. Brand 3. Tin Cup. Rocky Mountain imagery everywhere. A frontiersman on the label, Mountain Whiskey, plastered across every ad you've seen. For years, the whiskey inside was almost entirely MGP bourbon. From Indiana. Eventually they started blending in some real Colorado whiskey from Stranahan's, but for a long stretch, you were paying a mountain premium for Indiana bourbon wearing a Colorado costume. Sit with that for a second. You weren't paying for better whiskey. You were paying for a label designer. If you've ever grabbed a bottle specifically because the story on the front made you feel something, you already know exactly what I'm talking about right now. Tell me the brand that got you. Drop it below. I want to see how many of us fell for the same one. Now, brand 5. The one I told you to stick around for. High West. Utah's most awarded whiskey brand. Genuinely. A saloon in a ski town. Frontier spirit branding. Some of the most beautiful bottles in the entire category. For years, what was actually inside leaned heavily on MGP-sourced bourbon and rye, the exact same Indiana supply every brand on this list was pulling from. High West has since built out real distilling at its own ranch in Utah, and to be fair, the reality is finally catching up to the marketing. But for a long stretch, one of the most beloved, most trusted authentic Utah whiskey brands in America was pouring Indiana juice into Rocky Mountain bottles. That's the one that actually got me. Not because it was small and sketchy, because it wasn't. This was the name whiskey people pointed to as proof American craft could hang with Kentucky's biggest players. A master distiller, who actually runs a grain-to-glass operation in Brooklyn, put it best. In this industry, unless you already speak the jargon, you genuinely cannot tell who's distilling their own whiskey. Produced by, bottled by, distilled by. 3 phrases that sound basically identical to a normal person standing in a liquor aisle, and mean 3 completely different things to a lawyer. That confusion isn't an accident. It's the entire business model. Remember that number from the very beginning. 3 labels, 1 tank. This is exactly what that looked like. Play by play. Different mountains printed on the front. Same factory floor in Lawrenceburg the whole time. And here's the thing that actually bothers me most about all 5 of these. Not one of them is a small operation trying to survive. These are brands with real marketing budgets, real distribution deals, shelf space in every major liquor store in the country. They had the money to tell you the truth, and calculated that the story sold better. That's not a struggling craft distiller stretching the truth to stay afloat. That's a business decision, made by people who knew exactly what handcrafted would make you assume. If you're the kind of person who wants to know what's actually true before you spend money on it, subscribe. We do this every single week. Now let's fix your bar cart. Here's the good news, because you've earned some. There are American whiskey brands doing the exact opposite of everything I just told you. They'll tell you precisely where it came from, because they've got nothing to hide. Best pick, Buffalo Trace. Owns and runs its own distillery in Kentucky, has for generations. No mine to question, no mountain to fact-check. A distillery that's been running continuously since before Prohibition even ended, still priced like it doesn't know how good it is. If you want zero guesswork whatsoever, start here. Good pick. 4 Roses. Fully self-distilled, same as Buffalo Trace. But here's the detail people miss. 4 Roses actually publishes its recipes. 10 different mash bill and yeast combinations, fully documented, public, no mystery whatsoever. When a brand tells you exactly what's in the bottle down to the yeast strain, that's about as far from a marketing story as whiskey gets. Third pick, if you specifically want that small distillery energy without the fairy tale. New Riff, out of Kentucky. Transparency is the entire brand identity. No additives, non-chill filtered. They say outright, plainly, that they distill everything themselves instead of sourcing it and dressing it up in a costume. Newer name, doesn't have the decades of history the first 2 carry, but the honesty is baked into how they talk about themselves. And if none of those 3 are on the shelf in front of you right now, here's your minimum move. Flip the bottle over. Look for Distilled By, with an actual distillery name and location attached to it. If all you find is Produced By or Bottled By with no distillery named anywhere on that label, that's sourced whiskey in a costume. It might still taste incredible. Just don't pay the story tax on top of it. Here's the pattern. If you only remember one thing, brands that own their distillery usually just tell you. Brands that don't sometimes build an entire mythology so you stop asking questions. That's not every sourced brand, to be fair. Plenty of them are upfront about it these days, and what's inside can be genuinely excellent whiskey. But the 5 I just walked you through weren't upfront. They built a myth instead, and at least one of them got taken to court for it. So here's what actually changes for you tonight. You don't need to memorize 5 brand names to protect yourself for the rest of your life. Just check the back label. Distilled by versus produced by or bottled by. One phrase. It tells you more than the entire front label combined. And if the story printed on that bottle sounds a little too perfect, a little too much like a movie you've already seen, that's your cue to go check before you buy. None of this means sourced whiskey is bad, and it definitely doesn't mean every craft brand out there is lying to your face. It means the story was never the part protected by law. Only the alcohol content was ever guaranteed to be true. Everything else was always just a pitch someone got paid to write. Next time you're standing in that aisle, reaching for a bottle, you're not just choosing a whiskey anymore. You're choosing whether you're buying what's actually in the glass, or the story printed on the outside of it.